welcoming me back again to your lovely city. Been here 2 or 3 times now. Always nice to come back, get a bit of warmth before I go back to the cold winter in Germany. Now, a quick notice. Paul was here this morning talking about how high it was up here, and it is really high. So, John, it's your job to fish me out of the undergrowth here, should I fall, you know. It really is quite high. Another point, if I'm talking too slowly, tell me to speed up, okay? I'm used to working in Germany, and when I make my presentations in Germany, I speak a little bit slowly so that people can understand. And all the British people in the audience say, "You are speaking so slowly, Craig. Can you speed up a bit?" So, if I'm too slow, just sort of say, make a signal at me. So, thanks for the introduction. Next generation tester is what I would like to talk to you about. It's sharing some of my thoughts about how testing and the tester moves into the future. Now, many of you that saw Paul's presentation this morning will have heard him say pretty much the same introduction. Looking back at IT, are things different today compared to, well, even yesterday? Well, I think that most of you would agree that the change in IT is very rapid, and testing needs to accommodate itself for that. We need to look at the latest challenges, face those challenges, be sure that we're continuously delivering value to our customers. And for that, we need a relevant skill set. And that's what I'm going to be addressing today. So I think it's time that we sat back and thought about how we want to go forward from here. It's what I call the next generation tester, the NG tester. It's handy calling it the next generation tester because if I do the same presentation next year, it's still the next generation tester. So, calling it the NG tester, right? So, what we're going to look at in this presentation, just to refresh our memories about where business is going, because, hey guys, business determines what we do, ultimately. We'll look at some of IT's responses to business demands in a technological sense and in the sense of the way that we work. And we'll look at competencies. Now, competencies are like similar to skills, but competencies are a statement of what you can do. I can design test cases for performance testing after speaking to the relevant stakeholders. That's like a competency for performance testing. And I think that we need to focus our minds on the things that we can do rather than, if you like, fixed roles. Now, I'll come back to that as we're going through the presentation. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about some of the key competencies that I feel that the next generation tester needs. We'll go through that in some detail, and afterwards I'll explain to you how I think that we should be putting that into a framework that helps us to move forward. And despite the introduction saying that I'm working with ISTQB, these are my thoughts, okay? It's not an official ISTQB presentation. Otherwise I'd be in trouble with my governance people. Okay, so let's refresh our memories. Let's see what business is facing. Well, if we don't understand that, it's going to be difficult to follow why we need the testing competencies that we do. So, industry has got to deal with far more complexity and volumes of data than they used to do. And we are faced, certainly in Europe, but I believe also in Malaysia, with the challenges of so-called Industry 4.0. It's the digital revolution, some people call it. Industry becoming digitalized. That places a lot of demands on industry. So the response actually to that shorter cycles, more cost effectiveness, flexibility in what we do, and ability to change rapidly. You could call it agility. So that's what business is about. So if you're talking to business people, that's what's in their focus. Okay, we're from testing. Quality is in our focus. But you will find that business people will relate better to you if you can talk their language and understand what their demands are. So quality, yes, but it has to be in balance with those other items there that we can see. So that refreshes the memory, perhaps. Now, how has IT tried to meet those challenges? In two ways. The first way is with new technological solutions. Now, there's a whole range of those, and you'll be relieved to know that I won't be covering all of those. But I've picked out 3 of them, just to give you an example of what testing challenges there are facing us because of these new technology solutions. And I'll be looking later on at some of these standout technologies, connected devices, that relates to mobile applications and IoT, looking at AI, artificial intelligence, and big data. Now, those are just going to be snapshots focusing on testing. You will not get a potted history and course on those 3 things. We will be here, as the Brits love to say, until the cows come home, and they take a long time. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So IT is meeting those challenges with that kind of technology. And I don't see Paul in the audience, but Paul made a very, very good presentation this morning. And he mentioned, actually, you know, it's not just technologies, it's also changes in the way that we work. We become much more collaborative. We're much more involved in talking to a range of different stakeholders and within our team as well. And we need this for Agile and for DevOps. You can't actually be an effective member of a team in Agile or DevOps without being collaborative in your overall style. And what that means is, well, it forces us into increasing levels of automation. We'll be looking at that in a moment. Continuous integration and all of these things that we need is pervading our actual job. Automation, as we'll see later, is no longer an optional thing, it's a must-have. So ways that we work have also changed in the sense that slowly but surely we're becoming much more intertwined with developers, with management, with engineers. So we see an engineering approach creeping into what we're doing. That's setting the scene. Now guess what? This has an impact on testing. What does it mean? Well, increasing levels of technology, increasing levels of complexity. How often have we heard this? Practically every presentation that you hear these days says, complexity increasing. Well, it's true. And tomorrow it will be even worse, if you want to call it worse. So testing skills, testing becomes more specialized, more collaborative, and if you want to say, more intelligent. We have to be more intelligent about the choices that we make, the skills that we acquire. So I'd like you to think perhaps more about competencies rather than roles. Things that you can do. Okay, things that you can do. And I gave you this example before. I can work together with developers to design automated performance tests and implement the required scripts. It's not just a what. It's not just a what you can do, but who are you doing it with? And how can you do it? So it's bringing in all of these aspects. And I think that when you see the competencies as we're going through the presentation, you'll get the drift of what I mean. So what does this mean for the NG tester? We need to ask ourselves some fairly fundamental questions. What will we need for the future? We'll be looking at that in a moment. How can we actually shape, how can we manage where we're going to? How can future testers perhaps plan their careers? Or how can organisations acquire good testers that meet their requirements? And, you know, how fundamentally can we ensure testing continues to add value to business? So let's take it from the top. We'll work through those points. NG tester, what competencies do we need? Well, some of you might be familiar with the so-called T model. The T model helps us represent skills in terms of general skills. It helps us to understand what kind of skills that we'll be looking for in the future. Now, let's take general first. General skills, I'm suggesting to you, are must-haves. Okay? These are not optional. This is what the NG tester, the next generation tester, will need for the future. What are they? Well, there's 5 of them. You might think to yourself, I could add 1 or 2. Yes, you probably could. But these are the 5 that I've picked out because I think they are so important that we all have these skills. So prepare for a bit of a shock, perhaps. Well, the good news is our testing essentials are still necessary. So knowing how to do fundamental testing is still a skill that we need. So it sounds like the obvious statement, but some people, you know, they go to conferences, they hear stories of everything's going to change, you've got to do all of this kind of stuff now, and forget what you've done before. No, you don't forget what you've done before. You can still use your fundamental testing skills. They will be important. Okay, so being able to use, for example, the big 5 test techniques. Okay, for test design: equivalence partitioning, boundary value analysis, decision tables, state transition tables, and combinatorial testing. Those are just examples of test design techniques. If you've got those, you've got the essentials of testing, if you like, your bag of techniques and tools that you can use. So being able to also perform exploratory testing belongs to testing essentials, in my opinion. And being able to take on all of the tasks that we've seen in a testing process, whatever that testing process may be. Now, obviously, I know the test process from ISTQB. Paul was suggesting another testing process this morning that looks different, but also similar. So it doesn't matter, as long as you can do those tasks. Okay? Testing essentials. And these are relevant also to developers. So the next general skill that you must have, I believe, is an understanding of system architectures. And you know, you need these understandings so that you can talk the right language to your stakeholders. We are going to be in a collaborative situation, which means we're going to be talking to architects, business people, and so on. If you can't talk their language, you're not going to be able to do your job properly. You're not going to be able to build your mental model, as Paul called it this morning. Okay? Get an idea of what is needed. What do I need to test? So you need a good understanding of the kinds of architectures that developers and architects talk about. Model view controller, client server, a whole range of them. So it's being able to discuss architectures. Without that, for example, it's going to be difficult for you to understand what needs to be tested in an IoT project. So soft skills, thank goodness for that. How many times have I got to say soft skills to people? Teaching soft skills all the time. And it continues to be one of the most important skills that you can have. Now, it means being able to participate in collaborative teams. If you don't have that, if you can't be assertive, if you can't understand, if you can't practice active listening and the various techniques, it's going to be quite tricky for you to participate in collaborative teams and show your competencies. So it's being able to communicate, and it's knowing how much to communicate. How much to communicate in terms of, in particular, what you report to people. Okay? How much time you spend discussing and how much time you spend doing. So that's the third of the general competencies, competency areas. Fourth one, hold on to your seats. I believe that now working with test automation has become a must-have skill. And this was brought out also this morning by Paul, where he said, fundamentally, my screen's gone blank. He said that a couple of times as well, didn't he? Where he said, look, if you're working in DevOps, if you're working in Agile, you as a tester will be confronted in one way or another with the subject of automation. So it's going to be helpful for you to know something about test automation architectures, about some scripting languages. It doesn't mean that you've got to suddenly become the best developers in the world, but you do need to have an understanding for the principles of scripting, the principles of good test automation design. And I think that every tester should have that going forward. It's no longer optional. So it's what Paul, interestingly enough, called this morning pervasive automation. I added that to the slide. Pervasive, it's always there. Okay? Now I can remember the days when that was like a specialist niche subject. It's not anymore. It doesn't happen that way. Okay. So let's just move on one. Being able to work in Agile and DevOps projects. So Agile and DevOps is not just coming, it's there. Perhaps DevOps a little lagging behind. So the skill that we need is to be able to know where testing fits into all of this. It's no good coming along into a DevOps project and saying, okay, right, well, we'll take a sequential approach to testing. You know, testing happens in this big block at the end. You can't do it anymore, of course, and we saw some examples of that this morning. So that's what we're looking for your NG tester of the future, that they're able to fit in to a project that is using an Agile or DevOps approach. And that's going to mean soft skills, programming skills, and automation skills. Okay, at least at a basic foundation level. Now, those were general skills. Now remember we said that the model that we're looking at initially is the T model. So we've looked at the horizontal bar of the T with its 5 competencies. I will look now at some of the specialized competencies. And as you can probably imagine, that number is between 0 and n. You can define a lot of specialist competencies. Just to give you a flavour of what they're about and some examples, I'm going to just look now with you at the 3 areas I mentioned earlier of big data, connected devices, and artificial intelligence. But be aware that this goes over to a sort of like n number. So let's just have a look at the specific aspects then that we're considering in these specialized skills. big data first. Quite a lot of text here, sorry about that. Big data. Big data fundamentally helps organizations extract value from a mass of data. Okay, that's the fundamental idea. Now, the challenges that poses to testing, got 3 points here. Performance of the actual analysis. Analysis of the data helps business people make decisions and understand what's going on. If the analysis takes 3 weeks to run, maybe an exaggeration. If it takes too long to run, then it's not useful. So performance is a characteristic that you need to be able to check for big data applications. You need to check its scalability. Can it deal in the future with more and more data? And you need to be looking at the functional correctness of what's actually coming out, what the actual information is that you're seeing on your screen. So, you know, from an operational point of view, the tester has got to actually make clear to the business people that they have what's called a single point of truth in their organisation. They are taking decisions day to day on what their organisation will do based upon that information that they're getting. Now, that represents for me a fundamental risk that's got to be tested in the sense of the things that I mentioned before, and in the sense of the operational availability of this. It can't go down. There must be backups. There must be procedures. It must run continuously. All of these things are requirements, almost implicit requirements for big data. They've got to be tested. Does it work? Or is it like, you know, the system's gone down, let's run around like headless chickens for the next hour or two, and then we'll see what we can do. That's no way to run a company, is it? So those are the things that we see as challenges for us in order to help business test and get the best quality out of their big data. And what it means for our competencies is that we need to understand the architectures of big data applications. We need to be able to ask the right questions of business. And this is an interesting aspect, we need to be able to work together with business, perhaps in exploratory sessions, so that they can actually say, yes, I'm getting value out of this or not. Okay, so we might sit down with them in a paired situation, run through some profiles or some scenarios, and ask them afterwards, is that what you wanted? Is that right from your point of view? So that's where we see that kind of the competency of the tester coming through into big data applications. Just as a flavour for you. So with connected devices, mobile apps, Internet of Things, the challenge that we have there is, do you know what? The people are actually making IoT systems just almost on the fly. They're changing things in, swapping things out, new devices here, new software versions there. It's all in motion. Faced with that kind of situation, there's a huge challenge on testing to ensure that those IoT applications are running as we expect from a usability point of view, performance point of view, security. By the way, I read a great book. The benefit of long flights is you get to read a book. And I read a book, and it was called Blackout. Has anybody read Blackout? Nobody. I can recommend the book. I don't get any payback for it. It's fictional, but it describes an Internet of Things problem. And it describes how a group of anarchists, by using a hack into a power meter that's measuring electricity, managed to bring down the world's electricity supply. Oh, that's a bit of a risk, isn't it? with the intention that society would collapse. And I won't go, I'm not going to spoil it for you if you want to read it. But this guy actually said at the end, this is fiction, and he's been invited to so many real-life conferences to talk about this because everybody realizes that this is a risk. Now, testers, the NG tester, has got to appreciate that kind of thing, and it's no good me just saying, oh, learn about testing security systems. It's actually saying, I need to look at what the security issues might be for IoT systems. So, forget any of these and your application from a quality point of view may fail. So, testing applications with CD, the competencies that we might need, well, do need, well, we can supply the information. Just in that example about security, we can point business to the areas that can be risky and ask them, A, do you have these risks? Or could you have these risks? So our skill, our competency is to devise testing solutions to meet those requirements, especially in the area of usability, security, interoperability. Those three things. If you've got those in your portfolio of competencies, then you can go along to a project that's involved in mobile applications or IoT and say to them, I can do this, I can help you, these are the things I can do. Notice the difference between saying that and saying, I'm a test analyst, or I'm a technical test analyst. My job is to consider these things according to syllabus. It's a different approach that we have, you know? ITQB is going to shoot me if I hear it. Anybody from ITQB here? We're okay. All right. So, now the challenges that we're facing now in this sense for artificial intelligence. Okay, we probably have heard of AI. What's the challenge that we see for testing? And this is the key point. This is the different thing with AI. It's about matching requests to a kind of a knowledge database. Matching them such that you're giving people the response and the answer that they want. So what you're looking for are so-called scenarios of underfitting and overfitting. So imagine that you're a help desk. This is a classic AI application area. And the help desk is, you know, a person has been replaced by a system. Not so great, but that's the way it's going. So the system has got to be able to receive your questions, match to a database that it's created, give you an answer. That's how it works. Now, underfitting is where you ask it something, it says, no idea, find out for yourself. Underfitting. I've got this massive background of knowledge, but hey, I can't answer your question. It doesn't fit my knowledge. Overfitting is the opposite. I put in a simple question and I get pages of information out. And I think, well, hang on, where do I start, you know? So those are the conditions that you as a tester need to be aware of. And you must try and work with the people that are developing the algorithms for AI to ensure that you don't have underfitting or overfitting happening. You want just the nice fit. Okay? That's the golden objective, if you like, of AI. Now, the other challenge that we have is, you know, we teach everybody a test is only a test if you've got an expected outcome. So what's an expected outcome for AI? Bearing in mind that an application in AI is learning all the time. The expected outcome is changing all the time as well. So we're trying to sort of nail it down. It can't be nailed down. So you've got to try and get around that by using test data. So getting on to the actual competencies that we need. The NG tester for AI applications needs to talk the risks. We've had that before. They need to understand what to test. And in particular, they need particular skills in, you can call it test management if you like, but it's basically being able to set up the data such that you can run a test. Because if you run the test against a live data set, you're chasing a moving target the whole time, and you can't really define your tests. So that's a competency that you'll need, a key competency, if you're going to actually add value to testing an AI application. So we've considered now the broad-based general must-haves, the blue ones up the top there, and we've looked at 3 of the specialist areas. Now, bearing in mind, those specialist areas, as I said before, can be expanded. I wouldn't say it's a continuum to infinity. Eventually, we've run out of specialist subjects, but it's more than those 3, okay? So you might like to add, for example, other testing specialities. I'm sure that you could think of them straight off your head now. Those might include also business domain specialities. It could be like, okay, a speciality in testing banking and insurance systems, or railway systems, or whatever, industry specific. And so the NG tester of the future will need between 0 and quite a number of specialist skills, depending upon what you need. Okay, we'll get onto that in a moment. So that's the picture of where we are now. That's our T model expanded. So the vertical of the T has been expanded into lots of verticals. So how to define your NG tester? I think we've got the idea now. We need general competencies. We need specialist competencies. Now, we also need to consider levels of those competencies. Now, this is just a suggestion. This is just me thinking, all right? You can call those levels essentials, advanced, and consulting. That's what I'm suggesting. So essentials, I think you've got the idea of what essentials are. This is basic stuff that you need to know. Advanced develops on that so that you can handle complex situations. Consulting means, do you know what? You can tell other people about that. You can mentor them. You can go to customers. You can tell them, you can tell other people. You can be, if you like, a multiplier. And as you can probably imagine, there's a range of different competencies you'd be looking for to handle those specific aspects. It's just like Blackpool illumination. Oh, you wouldn't understand that. My screen's going on and off about 10 times a second here, but there you go. Right, good. So now, the big picture. The big picture. This is what I'm suggesting that we need. All right? We need not just to talk about individual competencies, but we need to put them into a framework. A framework. Now, what's in the framework? The framework consists of all of our general competencies at essentials, all of the general competencies at advanced, all the general competencies at consulting level. All of them. Ooh, okay. That's what the framework gives you. in our presentation, we've looked at 5 of those. I think that 5 is quite a nice number there. Could be a few more. And this is where it starts to get exciting. All the specialists at various levels, essentials, advanced, and consulting. The blue bits and the yellow bits. The framework contains those competencies. There will be a lot of them. Remember Paul's presentation this morning, maybe if you were here? What did he show towards the end? A list. He made a list. I think there was about 40 or so on his list, and that wasn't by any means the lot. Now, I think a list is quite okay, but I think... is Paul here? But I think a framework is better. Not because it actually makes the list redundant in any way, but it captures what's on the list and puts it into a framework in a way that we can reuse across industries. So, right, so we've got the blue bits and the yellow bits in there, okay? Now I've added some extra things that we need for the framework. We need criteria for achievement. It's all very well me saying to you, oh, you need this competency, do it. If we have this in a framework, we will need to know, how do I actually establish whether somebody has got those competencies? And for that, we need a certain amount of information in our framework about how to assess those. Now, how do you assess competencies? Well, it depends, doesn't it, at which level you're looking at. If you're looking at the essentials level, it could be, this is just a suggestion, it could be that you say, go take a course, perhaps take a certification exam. That's your evidence, if you like, that you've achieved the essentials in a particular competency. Okay? Fine, so you might have for the foundation level ISTQB, you may have a certificate and say, well, that's good for these competencies. However, if you go to an advanced level, I think we're all starting to agree that at the advanced level, you really need to be able to not just show knowledge, but you need to be able to show that you can practically use it in real projects and in a complex situation. Now, Paul this morning, Paul Gerard was suggesting that he was suggesting a course that he called Foundations Level, and he said, for each day of theory, it was a couple of days of practical to show that you could actually do that. So afterwards I thought to myself, how does that fit in with what I'm saying? Well, it would fit in around about here, practical evidence at advanced level. So actually what Paul was suggesting would be his foundation level would in the framework sense here I'm suggesting around about advanced level. So just so if you've been watching the two presentations that you can map the two a little bit. They're not contradictory, they're actually complementary, what he was saying and what I'm saying here. So now it starts to get exciting over here. Practical assessment. If you're a consultant, if you're expected to be able to give people consultation, mentoring, you've got to prove that you can do it by actually showing in a practical situation that you can do it yourself. Now, that's something that is happening in the UK with their so-called apprenticeship scheme, and I learned actually that the same is run in Malaysia, where you actually have people taking courses and training in a company. The company is giving you a job to do, you're doing practical work that matches a set of competencies that you're expected to have after 18 months or 2 years. And at the end of that, in order to show that you've got those competencies, you have what's called an endpoint assessment. The endpoint assessment is where you submit a portfolio of the things that you've done. It's where you get an employer's reference. It's where you actually perform a task that's given to you that takes you 5 days to run. And at the end of it, you get an interview to check that the things that you should be covering in your competencies have been achieved. And that's the kind of thing that I do, which is great. Firstly, I can help people. I love doing that. Secondly, it gives you a view into what's happening in industry at the cold face. How are people doing things? It doesn't matter what you say in your lofty heights of ISTQB if the people on the front, as it were, are not doing that. They're doing something completely different. So it gives me, in my position, a check and balance. It gives me a little bit of a reality check. Now, I'm suggesting that any competency framework for the future should also include that practical assessment kind of idea in it. Right, so that's the big picture, that's the framework. Now, the burning question is, how do I use this thing? Well, 3 steps. Define what you want, establish where you are, fill the gaps. In other words, perform a kind of a gap analysis. So let's take those steps one by one. This is our old friend, the framework. It's become our old friend, okay? Now, where's that coming from, that framework? I'm suggesting that it's actually coming from industry organisations, such as ISTQB, such as British Computer Society, such as any kind of international quality organisation. They should be able to define for you this framework consisting of the individual competencies, how to measure them, how to assess them. That's the kind of job, to be honest, guys, talking to myself now, we should be able to do as an industry. So, how does it apply to me? Well, basically, you take what's in there, in the sense of all the competencies that there were, and decide which ones are for me. Which ones apply to my particular organisation or particular project. So, I'm suggesting, okay, for your project or organisation, it's still all competencies. I'm suggesting that's what you still need. But it's now become 0 to N here instead of all in the actual framework itself. You might decide you don't need any specialisations in your organisation. You might say, I just want generalists. Or you might say, I want particular groups of people that are really good at AI and mobile applications. That would be the set of competencies that I'd be looking for. And you pull that out of the framework and establish that for your organisation. It's a kind of a tailoring, but it's not really changing things, it's just selecting things. Which ones would I want? Now, that's your organisation that does that. So that's how it works. So the NG tester basically is what you define it to be, provided you've got a solid foundation framework that defines those competencies that you need. So that's defining your goals. That's saying we as an organisation need these competencies. So next step, establish where you are. Well, you've got your good old assessment model, haven't you? That's part of the framework. It tells you what kinds of things to look for, what criteria need to be fulfilled. It's reasonably objective. So that's really useful because you can assess your organization, you can assess a project, and I added this after Paul's presentation this morning because it suddenly, the penny dropped suddenly for me as well. Hey, you can use this for new hires. If you, in your projects or in your organization, want people with a particular competency set, this is the kind of stuff you need. It's not just a question, of Paul's example was for Ireland. I'm suggesting that this could be applied internationally. And that's quite powerful because it gives you a mechanism to pick the right people for the job that you need. It doesn't necessarily mean, you do see that sometimes with role-based things. The role-based certifications and things like this are good, but they don't always match precisely what each and every project or organisation wants. This is a way to get around that. Well, not get around it, but to adapt that idea. So filling the gaps, once you've defined where you want to be with your skills, this is what you want to have. Once you've assessed what you've got, the rest is easy, isn't it? No, not easy actually. That's the stage where you actually can set up a skills improvement plan, individually for individual people. Now, that happens in industry and projects now, but the key difference is you are basing that skills improvement plan on a solid basis, a solid framework of defined competencies and ways of assessing it. It brings a great deal more objectivity into what you're doing, selecting the right people, for example. It brings consistency because the framework hopefully would be something that would be freely available and internationally available. And it would be specific. So it's not just talking about wishy-washy things. It's saying this is what you need, these are the competencies, this is the definition of them, this is how you actually assess them, these are the criteria. That will fit your projects if you're doing AI and business and big data. And these, by the way, are going to be your fundamental general skills that you need for everybody. It gives I'm hoping, a kind of a tool to you all for use as you wish. And I would hope that the organisations can start to think about how to construct this kind of framework. There have been attempts to write frameworks before. This isn't a new idea. But they've been based upon IT in general. They're not really as specific as we really need for testing. It's a little bit like, if any of you know CMMI, perhaps, it's a way to assess the IT capability of an organisation based upon a large number of so-called process areas, 2 of which relate to testing. That's not really what we want, is it? I mean, it's maybe useful to look at those 2 areas of testing, validation and verification, but if you look at what's in there, it's really, I'm sorry if there's any CMMI assessors here, but for testing, pretty naff would be the British way of saying it. Not that useful, okay? And I think that we can address that issue for testing in the sense of the skills framework. So, going forward then, just to wrap up a little bit, testing competencies are becoming much more varied. We need a framework to capture general skills and specialised skills. We need in that framework a level of achievement, a way of assessing and evaluating that achievement. And with that, you can define your own NG tester. That should, I'm pretty confident that it will, if we can follow that kind of procedure or approach. That will give us a much better chance of making sure that the skills that we have, the competencies that we have, match actually the needs of business and industry, which is actually what it's all about. So, got time for a few questions for you. Thanks for listening attentively to that, especially after lunch. I know it's difficult. Did I speak too quickly or too slowly? Too quickly? No. Too slowly? Just right?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks. So we've got about 10 minutes or so for any questions if you have them. Or you can catch me wandering around, as I will be during the week. Any questions from anybody? Great, well, we saved a bit of time then. Just 10 minutes for questions is usually good. So if you don't have any, come up to me later maybe. Maybe you don't want to speak, I don't know. Thanks a lot, thank you.